under the name of Louis, L-U-I-S, Peltz. Peltz was my family name. Why I was called Louis, I don't know, because my Yiddish name is Nissim, and Nissim translates to Nat. I understand the Spanish they didn't have at that time anything but Nat, so I was called Louis. I came to this country when I was only 6 months old. That is the United States when I was only 6 months old. And of course I don't know where. We moved to Brooklyn, that's all I know, Brooklyn, New York. And my father's name was Samuel Peltz. My mother's name was, maiden name was Minnie Malaskis. And all our brothers whose name was also Malaskis changed it to Katz. So, but we still say that my mother's name is Minnie Malaskis, single name. And as far as my early life is concerned, I remember living in Williamsburg. I remember walking up a high tenement, 6 floors high. We lived on the top floor. We had to walk up and down. There were no elevators in those days. I remember living in Moore Street, and Barrett Street, and Debevoise Street, and Cook Street, and I don't know how many more places. But we never lived more than 1 or 2 years, because in those days, when you moved into a new place, the landlord would paint. So it was customary to move after 2 years were up, so that you moved into a place that was painted, and you didn't have to really struggle through painting. You moved into a nice, clean place. When we lived in Williamsburg, all my aunts and uncles lived within an area of about 2 or 3 blocks. So that on every Sunday, we all got together, all the kids got together, and the big folks got together. Of course, the adults, they played cards. Cards was their pastime, and they would play casino or whatever the game was. I don't think they played poker. I think they just played casino. And I had a sister Rose, a brother Ben, a brother Simon, a brother Harry. We also had a little sister who unfortunately passed away when she was about 2 or 3 years old. I also had I'm not the firstborn, there was one before me, but unfortunately he died in Buenos Aires, Argentina. It seems they were suffering some disease, and the woman with whom my mother was boarding was hesitant, was afraid for her child, so she told my mother to put my brother into a hospital, and she also told my mother not to say that she feeds the baby because they wouldn't take the baby in, which my mother did. But unfortunately, the baby did want my mother's breast, and my mother, not knowing what to do, didn't, and eventually the poor child passed away. And when we lived in Brooklyn, we had an uncle, Chlea, and Chlea was my mother's sister, and Simon was her husband. We had Uncle Joe and Aunt Sarah, and we had Uncle Haida and Haida and Uncle Shmuel. They were always fighting and battling, and the police always had to come to separate them and make sure. And who else did we have? Uncle Malek. Uncle Malek and Aunt Libby. Uncle Malek, Aunt Libby was a boss. Uncle Malek was afraid of a sharp tongue, and she kept him down. And he never spoke, and never was anything, I never was active at a meeting or anything like that. When she passed away, a complete metamorphosis. He began to speak and say his piece, and he became very active in the organization. And he also took up art and drew some artistic works. And for the time being, we also had Uncle Bull and Aunt and Shane Ruckel. and he persuaded my folks to move to Chicago. He was doing very well there. It was in real estate, and at that time, real estate was booming. And I think he even paid the passageway for my parents. They went to Chicago, and that's where my brother Ben was born. But we only stayed there a short while, and for some reason or other, my folks came back to Brooklyn. In 1935, when Mollie and I got married, Uncle Brooke, evidently his real estate empire having dissolved because of the Depression, moved to Brooklyn. And with his coming, we set up the Mahopac Family Circle, which has existed until this very day. Of course, when the Sisters and Brothers were active, this was a very active organization. We had meetings every month, a Hanukkah party, a pool party. It was a very active organization. But as time goes on, they passed away, and now they're no longer here. And the Mahopac is just only a name, and the only reason it exists is because of our cemetery. And that's what I can talk about right now, unless I'm asked definite questions. I don't know what to say.
Where did your parents come from?
My parents came from Russia. My father must come from a town called Bogato, because he belonged to what they call a lion, the lodge, and the name of it was Bogato. But otherwise, I really don't know. My mother used to tell the stories, but I frankly don't remember where she's from.
Do you remember anything about your grandparents?
No, I only remember that my grandparents were supposed to come to this country, but that my grandmother died on the way to the so-called Granites, where they would take the border. But my grandpa came with my Uncle Joe, and unfortunately, for some reason or other, they wouldn't let my grandfather in, and he went back. I don't know whether Uncle Joe went back with him or not. It's possible that he may have come in, and just my grandpa went back.
And what type of work did your father do?
My father was a tailor, but he always moved and always remodeled the store and always set up a new store. When he got sick, he was in a sort of retail business, selling, right after the war, used clothing was a big thing, and he would be selling used clothing. And as one of the gimmicks of the trade, he would buy new clothing and call it used, because it was such good condition that people felt that they were getting bought.
What was your home like as a child?
Well, my home life was very nice. I don't really recall too much. I was always protecting my sister, I remember. And I guess it was a normal life, except that my father took sick when I was about 10 years old. And I would always be doing something, be working in a drugstore, in a candy store. I was always doing something.
You know, what did your father have?
Well, right after the First World War, a certain type of influenza set in, which affected the brain. Many people died from it instantly, but those who survived always had brain damage. And in my father's case, it manifested itself with Parkinson's disease, which of course started out very mild at the beginning, but after maybe 10 years or so, he reached a stage where my mother no longer could handle him at home, and we gave him to Kings County Hospital and ward there. But my mother would go there twice or 2 to 3 times a week, bring him food and whatnot. And then when a so-called people home for the aged opened up on Rutland Road in Brooklyn, my father was one of the first patients there. And today,
It wasn't the people home for the aged, it was called Home for Chronic Disease.
I was called a home for chronic diseases because, well, my chronic disease, but at that time, it was just one 2-story building, but today it's a real institution with maybe all kinds of buildings. That's no longer called Home of Chronic Diseases, but Home but it's called a hospital. I don't know what the name is, but it's a hospital. And at one time, they called me up that my father had passed away, and we all rushed there. And we got there. One patient said, I saw your father tip over when he tried to tie his shoelaces. Now, my father was in no position to tie shoelaces, and I felt that something was wrong. And sure enough, it was a long part. My father was alive, and might say, as well as could be expected, no different than he was okay. And at one time, he had pneumonia. He was very, very seriously ill. We provided nurses from around the clock, and eventually he pulled out.
What do you remember about the neighborhood in Brooklyn where you grew up as a child?
Well, until I was about 10 years old, I really don't remember. But when I was around 10 or so, we moved to Myrtle Avenue, which was elevated running there. Myrtle and Hudson. Elevator ran on Myrtle Avenue, and elevator ran on Hudson Avenue. As a matter of fact, the elevator was no more than maybe 3 feet from our bedroom window. And at night you could hear, and there was a turning point there, and the elevator would turn and whatnot. I also remember once one of the neighbors had a candy store. He was selling the candy store, so he came around, gave me $1, and told me to give it to all the kids and have them come and sell. So I gave it to my cousin, a few other kids, but in order that the man should know what I do with the money, I went in and said, I'm sending in all these kids. So that's one of the little instances. That's where my bar mitzvah took place on Myrtle and Hudson. I remember playing some kind. My bar mitzvah took place in a shul that was open up only on Saturday. Well, it was open during the week, but it was a storefront synagogue. And my bar mitzvah was on a Thursday, and Saturday or Sunday we had a party. And well, the neighbors came, and I got all kinds of gifts, fountain pens, footballs, and whatnot.
Do you remember any of your friends?
Vaguely, I remember them, but I never had really contact with them.
What do you remember of school?
School, well, I went to a whole school where there were only 2 Jews in the class, but I never really felt any anti-Semitism. Matter of fact, it was blacks. It was a black neighborhood, and schoolmates were black, and I frankly don't remember any anti-Semitism. I didn't make any friends either, I don't think, because, I don't know, I was busy and just didn't make friends.
Do you remember any of your teachers from school?
Not really, not really.
Did you do any work when you were in school? School?
I worked in that drugstore, but I don't remember where I worked doing public school only after I started going to high school. Incidentally, I went to boys' high school, and I went there for 2 years. And then for some reason or other, either because I had a job or was going to get a job, I transferred to Eastern District Night School. And I went to night school for 2 years. And I was working for, at that time it was called the New York World. And my job was, people would telephone and they had in, and my job was to go out next day or so to try to collect for the ad. And I was more or less one of the more successful collectors, probably because I was conscientious. And I was well liked. And then there was a little promotion. I got the promotion upstairs where that time it was the adjustment section, where if there was any question about adjusting the ad or something like that, I was in charge of that. And then when the New York World sold out, and before the New York World sold out, I'd taken a test for the post office. And so I passed the test. I was second highest on the list. At that time, it wasn't yes or no answers. It really was a tough test. And only very few, you really had to be a high school graduate to really pass those tests. It isn't like it is today where if you can't even sign your name today, you can get the job. time you were very, very fussy, and I was working with college graduates, with high school graduates, people going to college, and working with people that passed the bar, accounting and whatnot.
Teachers.
And teachers. It was really very intelligent people who worked in the post office at that time.
Why don't you come back to college?
Well, that also, I was going to day college, and then when I started to work in the post office at night, I transferred to night college. I transferred to day college. So I was going to school, college in the day, and working at night. I don't think I carried a full program, or maybe I carried 12 points or so. But the point is, at that time, you had to write a thesis in order to get your BBA. So actually, I should have graduated in 1935, but because I was so busy, I did a lot of research on the thesis, but somehow or other I couldn't put it together. And finally, in 1939, desperation, I just put it all together, and while Mollie was in a basket, Mother was typing it up, and they did accept my thesis, so that though I should have been a graduate in 1935, I am considered alumni of 1939.
Do you remember what your thesis was about?
You know, I took a lot of Spanish. As a matter of fact, when I went to Boys High, I took Latin. And Latin, I memorized the pony so well that the first time I got an A. But the second time, for some reason or other, the pony memorization didn't help, and I got a D.
Do you remember anything special about your sister and your brothers, your relationship?
Well, I don't know. I remember once when my sister Rose got upset and was running away, and I ran up on near the elevator. I ran up after her and pleaded with her to come back. And then I also remember my mother crying because my brother Ben was in the hospital. I don't know what was in the hospital for, but that time he was in the hospital, and we could look at his pictures there for quite some time. Must have been there for maybe 2 months or so.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, that you'll have to ask Scott. I don't see why we can't.
Okay.
Okay. Meeting Mollie was one of those real romantic stories. We lived in a neighborhood where our folks had a hardware store. And my mother would go in there and buy hardware. And as two good Jewish women would do, they talked about their children. I have a daughter and I have a son. And back and forth. So they take pictures, we change pictures. I was interested. I called my daughter up. We went out. And thinking that I worked nights and I worked Saturdays, I didn't go out too often. But then when it came New Year's Eve, I asked her to go out with me. And she went out with me. And thereafter, it was a question of love at first sight.
You remember where you went that New Year's Eve?
I don't recall. I know we went with some people from the post office.
We went to a movie at the Paramount, I think. And then we went to a restaurant.
And I remember one of the men saying, "Boy, you got a nice, very pretty young lady there." And that clutched the argument. And then we were stuck for this.
Stuck? Is that what you would call it?
No, that's, what else?
Yeah. What was your early married life like?
Well, one of the reasons my mother gave permission to marry was on condition. Since my brother,
You were the oldest.
I was the oldest, and my mother had been married. Incidentally, it was my father's idea. See, Uncle Max was an old friend of the family. I knew his wife and whatnot. And when his wife died, he remarried somebody else and was on the rocks, and they separated. They quit. And my father may rest in peace, said to me, you know, it would be a good idea if Max and Mama got together. And he gave them their blessing. Now, my mother used to come to my... I shut it off.
No, keep going.
My mother used to come to my father every week, or twice a week. But when she got married, after all, she had a husband now to take care of.
And he had 4 children.
And he had 4 children. They were all living with us. And it was a tumultuous marriage. And one of the conditions that we had of being married was I had to contribute $20 a week was it $20 a week, $20 a month? I don't know.
$25 a month.
$25 a month.
1935 was a lot of money.
1935 was a lot of money. But, you know, at that time when you worked in the post office, you had a beautiful job. You were considered one of the elite because most people were unemployed or they were earning $10 or $15 a week, and I was earning, what, $20, $40 a week? $40 a week. And I was considered one of the elite. It's strange the way, you know, the way things looked out. At that time, it was a good job. Today, people look down on it. But at that time, in order to get a job, as I said, you had to be a college graduate. You had to be real intellectual. And our life was not really, it was tough, but the point is that at least our finances, we didn't have any problem with finances because I was working in the post office and that was a steady job. And while I was working in the post office, I still continued I went to school for accounting, and even though I had a full-time government job, at the beginning I was a sub, and you know, in those days a sub got 65 cents an hour, and there's no such thing as time and a half for overtime, and there was no sick leave while you were a sub, and no vacation. You could work 60 hours and all you got was 65 cents an hour. Today is much different. You get time and a half, you get vacation and so forth. But that was a sub. And in 1935, they reduced the work week, I think, from 48 to 40 hours, and that's when I was appointed a regular appointment employee. And as far as my life's concerned, we had our ups and downs, but by far and all, I think that it was more or less a happy life.
Where did you live when you first got
Well,
married?
when we first got married, we lived on Schenectady and Lefferts Avenue in Brooklyn.
That's still right.
We moved into a brand new building, and we were paying the enormous rent of $45 a month. When most people were paying $15 and $20.
And $30.
And $30. And we were looked upon as being extravagant. And Mollie's father, may rest in peace, mother kept on working. And
For 1 year, I
For 1 year, Mollie's father always kept asking, Lucia, when are you going to have a baby? And after
And
one
your
year,
mother, too.
and my mother too, and so after all those days, when you got married, a woman quit and started raising a family. So a year later, mother quit, and mother had a very good job. She was making $35 a week, and for a woman at that time to make $35 a week was very, very extraordinary. And I guess that's about it. Now my father, may rest in peace, the first apartment we had taken was 2 blocks from the hospital. And my father, and we would see him every Sunday, no question about it.
Wednesday, too.
And Wednesday, being out off, I worked nights, I'd also see him Wednesday. And when Marty was born, we would take him over there. And my father would, even though he had difficult walking, would walk over to the house, which was about 2-3 blocks from the hospital.
The neighbors
And the neighbors would ring the bell for him, because his hand was shaking so much, couldn't ring the bell, and he would come up and stay with,
He would love to see Marty.
after all. And we lived there we lived there 2 years, and for some reason or other, we had a beautiful apartment. For some reason or other, we moved to a place where I had a doorman, and we paid a little bit more rent, but it was a very dark apartment, and we were very just unhappy there. But, and now it's made a little bit more difficult. My father couldn't walk there anymore. It was too far, and he was a little bit disappointed. But, and then after that, and we got together with Aunt Joe's and Uncle Sam, and we rented a two-family house in Hart Street.
Williamsburg.
Well,
Williamsburg.
Williamsburg. Now, that was it wasn't a good arrangement because there was two different apartments. The arrangement was that they would live downstairs, we would live on the top floor.
We were paying more rent.
And we would pay more rent, and we would share the middle floor, bedroom or whatnot, something like that. And the only good thing about it was that when the draft came on, it was an Italian neighborhood. And they had a bigger pool of young men to call on. So while I got a...
That was during World War II.
Yeah. So although I got a high number, I wasn't called until much later in the war, when the war was almost over. So one good thing about it is that we avoided the drive by being in that area.
Well, you were placed in one aid, but then they passed a law. The
Well,
fathers could not be were not to be called.
Yeah. And, what else?
Okay, when did you move to Albany Avenue?
Well, from Hart Street,
We moved to Albany.
we moved to Albany Avenue. And that
That's
was,
where Stanley was born.
yeah, that's where Stanley was born.
And your father passed away a few months.
Yeah. And that place was very cold. The landlords very stingy.
Single thing.
Yeah,
Thing.
yeah.
They kept the place very, very
It
cold.
was 60 degrees in the house all the time in the winter.
And but we lasted 2 years there. About 2 years. And
Were we there? Oh, wait a minute. We were there about 8 years because Stanley was 7 when we bought the house.
About 3 years, 8
I didn't know why we lasted there so long.
What did you do when you wanted to eat?
years.
We hanged on the pipe.
And I think once in a while I would go down myself and show some snow up.
Cold.
Cold. Maybe snow. I don't know if it's much colder. But that's where we met the Crystals. They lived upstairs, and we formed a friendship with them. And for many years we kept in touch. They now live in Florida too. We send cards to each other, but we really have no personal contacts.
Do you remember anything about the neighborhood that's noteworthy?
Well, yes, I remember the Hebrew school that Mollie went to.
Oh yeah, we lived a block from.
Was 3 blocks from the Hebrew school.
Yeah, we lived one big block. Oh yeah, you're talking about Albany Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we lived about 3 or 4 blocks from the Hebrew school, which was in a synagogue. And the teacher there was very, very good. He had the young man, he had the boys trained so that came Saturday, he would have games for them. And he instilled in them that there should be no
Going to
movies on a Saturday, and that the parents should light candles. And he really
No shopping on Saturdays.
No shopping on Saturdays. And really instilled Judaism in them. And
You got a good education there, Mollie.
got Jewish education because it carries through to this very day. And from there, we bought a house in Avenue S. And we bought the house in 1949. 1949, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And we paid $13,000.
500.
Well, we gave a deposit of $500. And the price house was $13,000.
13,500 is house.
$13,500.
And then we put it
And
about
we were fortunate in that we got a BA mortgage of 4.5 or 6.5%. I don't remember.
4.5%.
4.5%. And we lived there for 25 years. The The kids went to the Hebrew school at Bethel Synagogue. Rabbi was spoken the rabbi, and they were both from Metro there, Mollie and Stanley.
They went to public school, and Stanley went to 153, public school 153, and then he went to Cunningham Junior High, and he went to Abraham Lincoln High School. Marty started in Cunningham because when we moved there, he was barely 12 years of age, and he was in Cunningham Junior High, and where he went into the what they call the rapid advanced classes, where he went into 3 years of classes and made it in 2 years. It was the seventh, eighth, the SP classes is what they called it, 7th, 8th, and 9th years. That's right, and he made it in 2 years. And then he went to James Madison High School. But by the time Stan went to high school, they rezoned the district, and he went to Abraham Lincoln High School. And Stan also made the SP classes, but the teacher advised me not to send him to the SP classes, that it would be too competitive, as he had frequently been out of school, kind of many colds, and she thought that it would be too much of a strain for him, and she suggested that although he did make it, that I just let him go on in the regular classes.
And Mollie was, when he went to Brooklyn College, at the beginning was very disappointed because all his friends had gone to Harlowtown colleges, and he wanted to go to Harlowtown College too. And
when we went to the school advisor, and he was only 16 when he graduated high school, and the school advisor, the college advisor, that is, she advised that, she says, if I had a son of 16, I wouldn't send him to an out-of-town college. I think that at 16 they're not mature enough to be on their own. And she said, and as long as he has the good grades to get in Brooklyn College, and at that time you needed very high grades to get into Brooklyn College, she says, and it's a very good college, and I don't see why he can't go to this college.
And,
we were influenced by her.
And the place, she was very disappointed, and his grades were very poor.
Not very poor,
Well, they were
but not
poor.
as good as
They
he
should
could
be.
do.
But after that, he stopped out and became took part in the public speaking and made the
Debating teams,
debating team.
joined up a frat.
And made up. He also got into fraternity, and I think he graduated from
Yeah, and honors.
Well, about Stanley, where did he graduate?
Degree?
Also with honors. He graduated with honors too. Stanley graduated with honors too.
Let me ask you a question. If a Pearlman is going to be listening to this tape 200 years from now, what would you want them to know?
What would you want them to know?
You'll pick up. I personally would feel, and I would want them to know, that they have much better opportunities. As I see it now, the young have much better opportunities, although they have a lot of problems today, like drug problems and other problems. I feel that academically and economically, the young are far better off today than we were in our days, because Dad and I went through very, very bad Depression days. And I think it's still carried over with us, that sometimes when we could be spending more money, we don't. We worry about it, which we retain since our early childhood days. Because during our early childhood days, when we had Depression days, they were selling apples on the street for 5 cents an apple for people to have to make a living so that they could earn money for food and rent in those days. And really, economically, people were very badly off.
In 1948, the state of Israel was established, and we were all very enthused about it, and we thought the problems of the Jewish people were solved. Unfortunately, such is not the case. The Arabs refused to accept the state of Israel, and the world couldn't care less. As a matter of fact, the entire world is more or less anti-Semitic, because anytime anything comes up, Israel always gets the short end of it. And frankly, I don't know what the end will be, because Israel is in trouble, and as I said, the world doesn't care less. The fact that Hitler exterminated 6 million Jews in gas chambers and whatnot, you would think that the world would feel remorse or sorrow. They did feel remorse and sorrow in 1948 for a short period of time, so that the state of Israel was able to be established. But after the state of Israel was established, and the Arabs started using their propaganda, and then again, even in the United States, anti-Semitism, people don't even know what a Jew looks like, are anti-Semites. Talk to them about Jews, they don't know what a Jew is, and yet they'll say all kinds of names about Jews. And
Only in some parts of the United States.
I think it's the most parts of the United States, because from early childhood they were ingrained by the church that the Jews killed Christ, and Jews don't believe in Jesus. Therefore, they can't go to heaven. Therefore, they're second-class citizens. Therefore, they are doomed. And with that kind of upbringing, with the children, which is repeated time and time again, so that when they reach adult, it's become ingrained in them, and it is easy for any group, to set up anti-Semitic organizations.
All right, so now it's over here. You want me to tell about Mollie?
Is it my paper?
Okay, my name is Mollie Pearlman. My maiden name was Goldstein, Mollie Goldstein. And I was the third child born of my mother and father. They also had a baby when they were married in Europe, and the baby died. And I had a sister who died when she was 12 years of age, and I was 11 at the time. And she had had a heart condition since she was a young child. In fact, when she was a young child, she had rheumatic heart disease, but in those days, they didn't have the sophisticated methods now of discovering it, and they didn't discover it until she was about 9 or 10 years of age, and then she was an invalid for a couple of years after that. I was born in Brooklyn on Garden Street, and I was one of the ones that was delivered by an obstetrician. Usually in those days, the women used to have midwives, but I had a doctor. I was delivered by a doctor. And most of my life was spent in Brooklyn. And I had a brother who was a year younger than I am, and his name is Aaron. We always called him Artie. My mother always called him Aaron, Artie. And that was, as far as I knew, that was his name. But actually, his name is Aaron. When I was about 10 years of age or so, my sister was 11, and at that time we were living on Michael Avenue, Brooklyn. My father had a hardware and house furnishing store. Actually, he was a tinsmith by trade, and I remember that during the years when there was Prohibition, he used to make up the equipment for people to make whiskey. And I remember men coming into the store and I must have been maybe 6 or 7 at a time, but I remember they would come in the store and they would ask him to make up special equipment, because in those days you were in, during Prohibition, you were not, stores were not allowed to sell liquor. There were no drinks at bars or anything. It was all in behind closed doors. And he would make up this equipment for these bootleggers, as you might call them. And then, as I said before, when we were about 10 or 11, my father decided that we should move to Montreal, Canada, for 2 reasons. For one reason, he thought that he might do better economically up there. And the second reason, he thought that it might be better for my sister suffering from heart condition. And he thought rather than be in the city, it might be better for her to be up in the open suburban area. And my mother had relatives there. My mother had come from Europe. She was the only one of her family. She was a large family of a number of sisters and brothers. And she was the only one of her family that came to the United States. My father had originally come to the United States with his parents and 2 brothers and a sister. And then he went back to get my mother, and he married her when he went back. And my mother's parents were well-to-do in Russia. That is, comfortably, they owned a business, and they did not want to come to America. But my father wanted to come to America, so my mother went with him. My mother came from Ekaterinoslav in Russia. My father came from Petrograd. And I remember now we moved around many, many different places in Brooklyn. We always lived in Brooklyn, but we moved to many different places. My father, no sooner would he fix up a store and build up all the shelves and everything for the hardware and house furnishing, and he would be there about a year or so, and then he would sort of get restless, and he would start thinking, well, maybe another neighborhood would be better. So he started to look around. He felt he might do, economically, he might do better in another neighborhood. Oh, I imagine he must have made a living, because we were eating and we were living in an apartment and all. And that meant we would always be uprooted from our friends and from the schools we attended. And we would have to go to another neighborhood and move into another apartment. It meant moving the store with all the merchandise and moving our home furnishings and everything, finding another apartment and moving that. And we did that a number of times during my childhood days. And I really never went to a school very long, maybe a year, or at the most maybe 2 years. And we lived in Borough Park, where I made friends in Borough Park. And I graduated school when we lived in Ridgewood. It was PS 75. And most of the people living in Ridgewood were Gentiles. There were just a few Jewish people in the school. But I made friends.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated, let's see, I graduated when I was about 12 and a half, which meant about 1924 and 1925, I don't remember. And then I went to New York High School in Bensonhurst. And that was was a comparatively new high school at the time. And we had a Dr. Potter who was the principal. And I enjoyed the classes very much. I enjoyed high school very much. I traveled there by train because we lived in Borough Park, and that was in Bensonhurst. And I did very well in high school. I made the senior Arister, and I graduated. I think I made the 4 years of work in 3 or 3.5 years. I don't remember. I was 16 when I graduated high school. And at that time, I took academic courses and commercial courses, and I got a regular diploma. And at that time, there were a lot of business schools, and when they found out you were graduating, they knew who the graduates were, and they would come to the house, and they would want. This goes back to public school. I'm sorry. When I graduated public school, they would come to the house and they would say, "Why don't you send your daughter to a business school instead of a high school? Why do you want to send her to a high school?" But my parents, and especially my father, was very education conscious. And he said, no, he wants me to go to high school, and he also felt that he wants me to go on to college too. And so I graduated high school, but then I went to work. And I went to high school at night because things economically weren't too good at home. I went to college at night, rather. I took courses at the Bernard Baruch City College. And I went to work. My first job paid $12 a week. I was an assistant bookkeeper. And I'd come into work, I'd have to be in work at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And work was when you finished, which could be 5, 6, 7, or 8 o'clock in the evening. And there were times when I couldn't even get to college, to my classes, because I had to work late at night. And I did struggle through, and I did go to classes for about a year. But then we had the 1929 crash, and the Wall Street crash, and things were very bad after that. And I just felt that if I leave early, they wouldn't like my leaving early. So I just had to give up college. And then I worked for several different jobs. And first I would start as an assistant bookkeeper, and then I would become the full bookkeeper. And in fact, one job I worked where I was the assistant bookkeeper, and it was for an imported concern. It was an Italian concern, and they imported coral, semi-precious jewels. And I worked there for quite a while, and it was during Depression days, and things were very bad. The 4-week salary at a time, not only would they owe me the salary, but the man that owned the place, he lived out in New Rochelle, and he had a beautiful home out there, and he had a maid and a chauffeur and all that, but he couldn't pay their salaries either, and they just stayed on because it was a place for them to stay and have their meals in the home. And when I saw that he owed everybody so much money, and that he was owing my salary and running behind, the day when I got my salary, when I paid up, I decided I must go and look for another job so that he doesn't fall behind, because I realized that he wouldn't be in business very long that day. So I got a job as an assistant bookkeeper in a dress manufacturing concern. And there were 5 brothers and 1 brother-in-law in the concern. It was a very large dress concern. I started as an assistant bookkeeper, and after I was there about 1 year or so, they decided they didn't like the one who was in charge over me, and she was the head bookkeeper, and they decided that they wanted me to take her job, and I did. I took her job, I took her place. It was a very, very responsible job. Not only did I do all the bookkeeping, I had 2 assistants. I had an assistant bookkeeper, and I had a secretary. And I had to also extend credits. I was the one that extended the credits to the concerns, to the stores. We were selling dresses that retailed for $25. It was $16.75 wholesale, which in those days was a good brand of a dress. And I was the one that had to okay which firms got credit, and I had to watch that the bills were being paid. And we sold a number of large stores and a number of large What those stores called where they buy for others? I forget what they were called. What? No, merchandise companies that bought for department stores, plus the fact that we had buyers come in from department stores. Well, anyway, and we had a beautiful showroom. We had models in the showroom. It was really quite a large concern. And it was a well-paying job because when I was I had started with much less, but by the time I left there, I was earning $35 a week, which in those days was a lot of money because a lot of men weren't even earning $20 and $25 a week. That was during Depression days. Well, when I got married, it was 1935, and I was there probably from about 1932 until the end of 1936. And it was quite a responsible job. There were many a night I wouldn't sleep worried about the money coming in because I was the one that had to okay the credits. Of course, there were different credit clearinghouses that I used to get the credit to get the establishment of to get the credit ratings of the firms. But anyway, then I met Dad, my husband Nat, and we went together for about 6 months, and he gave me an engagement ring. I lived on Green Avenue in Williamsburg, and he lived across the street from me on Green Avenue. And it was very convenient for him to take me home when we would go out on a date. And then one time I was going to work, I was walking to the subway, and he calls out of the window across the street. He was working nights at then in the post office. He says, "Molly, I want to see you." And I come over to his house, and he says, "Come in, I want to show you something." I walk into his house, and he had 3 brothers, and they were all walking around in their underwear, and I wasn't accustomed to that. But he says, "Come in, I want us to," and he shows me the engagement ring that he bought for me. He was supposed to have given it to me that weekend, but he just couldn't wait until that weekend, and he gave me the ring that morning. And I took it, I put it on my finger, and I was congratulated by everybody, and then I went to work with the ring on my finger. And we were married in December 28th, 1935. We were married December 28th, 1935. And I worked for 1 more year. I really would have worked longer, and I should have worked longer because I was making a very good salary. But there were 2 things that stopped me from working longer. One was the fact that everybody kept saying, "Why are you working when your husband's making a living?" Because in those days you didn't have too many women working after they were married. In fact, there were very few women working once they got married. They were expected to stay home and have babies right away. And the other thing was I was lonely because I worked all day, and Nat worked at night. He had night hours. And the only time I saw him was on the day he was off, which was 2 days a week, necessarily not even a weekend. It might be during the week, and then I would be working during the week. So it was only in those 2 evenings that I might see him. So it was a little difficult. But then I stopped working, and then I became, after I stopped working, I was home for a while, and then we decided to have a baby. Now, Marty was born in 1938, April 1938, and that's when he was born. We lived on Schenectady Avenue at that time. That was our first apartment. It was a beautiful apartment, and we lived on the 6th floor in a new building, an elevated building. You want me to continue?
How's your role when you got there?
Oh, yes, and we...
How easy went to the building?
What?
You went to the building because Cousin Rose...
Oh, yes, the reason why I moved into that building was because Dad's cousin, Bernie, and his wife Rose, who had been married about 2 years before us, were living in that building at the same floor. So we decided we liked the apartment there. It was a beautiful apartment, very large apartment, very bright and roomy. And so we decided to take the apartment there, even though the rent was about $45, and those days $45 was high, but we felt we could swing it.
What, do you remember anything about your grandparents and their relatives?
Yes, I remember my grandmother and grandfather, that is my father's mother and father. I remember them very vaguely. They died when I was very, very young. I do remember my uncles, my father's two brothers, and his sister and aunt. And I remember that on Sundays we used to go visiting. One lived in Williamsburg, and one lived in Borough Park. And we used to have to travel about an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to Borough Park by different subways and elevated trains and all. And we would spend Sundays there.
What were the names?
And the names were, yes, one was Uncle Max and Aunt Bella, and the other one was Uncle Harry, and I forgot her name already. And then I had another, and then my father had a sister, and her name was Fanny, Aunt Fanny. She had a son by the name of Max. Her name was Fanny Album, and her son was Max Album. And I have cousins. I still have a cousin by the name of Ann. Right now her name is Ann Schmidt. And I have one cousin living who lives in Maryland. His name is Jack Goldstein.
Who are the relatives that you have in Montreal?
Oh, yes. We have relatives in Montreal, and that was from my mother's side of the family. Her uncles, she had an uncle and two uncles and two aunts that went to Montreal. When they came from Russia, they went to Montreal and settled there. And they have a very large family. My mother's maiden name was Yetnikov. Her first name was Rebecca. And there are still Yetnikovs in Montreal.
I read one of the scenes is a book shot with RCA or CBS.
Walter Yetnikov, he's with CBS, and he's a vice president with CBS. His name is Walter Yetnikov, and he is in New York. The others are all in Montreal. When we were 12 years of age, when I was 12 years of age, we went to Montreal, and we only stayed there about 6 months or so, because my father couldn't find anything to do to make a living, so we decided to come back to New York.
Do you have any memories of your friends when you were a child? Any friends that you had?
Yes, I remember a friend that I had. Her name was Hilda. I don't remember what her maiden name was, but her married name is Zacher, I think. And it so happened that when Martin went to Brooklyn College, he met a boy by one of his classmates was the son of this friend that I knew when I was a little girl. I had attended her wedding when she got married.
What recollections do you have of Brooklyn?
Well, my recollections of Brooklyn was that I lived in a neighborhood where the people were working class neighborhood. We were not well-to-do. All of us were more or less on the same economic level. And I was never very unhappy, even though I don't feel that I had much, but I was still a happy child. I do remember that when it came to holidays, when it came to Passover, and when it came to the High Holy Days, we would always get new outfits of clothes. My parents would make sure that we always had new outfits, new clothes at that time. And we went to Hebrew school. I went to Hebrew school when I lived in Williamsburg. And then when we moved to Borough Park, and my brother Aaron went to Mexican Cemetery, which is still in existence in Borough Park. I went there too, and he was bar mitzvahed there. We had his bar mitzvah party up in the house. We moved the furniture around a little bit and put up long tables. My mother had an aunt, my father's aunt, who came to stay with her 3 days before the bar mitzvah, and they cooked all the food for the bar mitzvah, and we must have had about 70 or 80 people in the house, and they had cooked the meal for them. It took about a week to get all the food prepared, and I don't know where they really kept it because we didn't have any refrigeration in those days. We had ice boxes. Well, Audie was born in 1913, so I would say this was about the year 1926 when we had the bar mitzvah. Now, I do remember that he must have gotten about 30 fountain pens and about 26 scarves. And he was very short for his age, and when he stood up to read the Haftorah, they had to put him on the box so that we could see him. And in those days, it was the custom for people at the bar mitzvah, for the parents of the bar mitzvah boy to provide the guests with little bags of candies and nuts. And as soon as the boy was bar mitzvah and read his Haftorah, everybody would throw the bags down at him.
Do you remember any particular vignettes for you and Uncle Audie?
Oh, yes. I remember that Uncle Audie, he always wanted his way in things. When he was a little boy and he wanted something, no matter how busy my mother was, my father, and before a holiday, like before Passover, they were very, very busy in the store because they sold pots and pans and dishes. And in those days, the Orthodox people used to change their dishes for Passover, and they used to buy everything new for Passover. And even if they didn't buy the new thing, they weren't allowed to use the same things that you use all year round. So they had to replace some things every year too, and the store was very busy. And he would come in and he would say he wants a toy down in the toy store. I remember one particular time he wanted a fire engine in the toy store. And my mother and father said to him, "We're very busy. The store is very busy." He sat in the middle of the floor and he screamed and he kicked his feet. And my mother had to stop everything. She had to go and buy him the fire engine. And I do remember once he had a bar of candy and he shared it with his friends, and he wouldn't give me any. And I said to him, "Your own sister, your friends mean more to you than your sister does?" And I do remember that when we were teenagers, he was a year younger than I was, I taught him how to dance.
Okay, Dan, you want to talk about the aunts and uncles? The distant cousins?
Another session.
Well, I want to tell you about our wedding. Our wedding was held at the Quincy Manor, which was in Williamsburg at that time, and it was owned by my cousin's father-in-law. And it was really a very nice wedding, and the cost of the wedding, the charge they were for a couple was, I think, $3 a couple. Of course, they did not have smorgasbord like they have now, but they served you a dinner. And then at the end of the dinner, before the desserts, the waiters would put out plates and toothpicks, and that meant that everybody would put their tips in there. And so the guests were expected each to put a dollar a person or a dollar a couple in the plates. And then the band was hired for 4 hours. But if it looked like the guests wanted to stay on, and you wanted the band longer, you went amongst the guests with a hat, and they each put something in the hat to pay for the band, for the extra time of the band playing. Oh yes, and the gifts we got were like about $5 a piece. Those were the wedding gifts in those days. And in fact, we got $2 or $3 from some guests.
Anything else?
I Faye, God, something or other. Faye, I had a friend. Her name was Faye. Gorish. Faye Gorish, and she lived across the street from me in Williamsburg. And we were very friendly together. We were very friendly for a number of years. But then after I got married, our interests were different. I did introduce her to a friend of Nat's, and his name was Harry Newman, and she really liked him very much. And I think she pushed him a little bit too hard too soon, because after she met him, after she went out with him two or three times, she had her mother invite him over for dinner at his house, and at her house rather, and I think that sort of scared him away. And I do want to also tell you that I remember when they went out on dates with young men, and they would come to the house, and my mother would be there and inquisitive right away. She had to see who I was going out with naturally, which I don't blame her for, but then she would also inquire as to their education, their work, how much money they were earning, and I would feel terribly embarrassed lots of the time. And I was going, before I met Nat, I was going with some boy who lived in the Bronx, and he used to come to Brooklyn and take me out, and we went together for a year, and then the last few months he slept over at my house, and but then his parents were divorced, and his mother didn't want him to get married. She thought he was too young to get married. I think he was about 22 or 23. I was younger, about a year or so younger, and she felt that he was too young to get married. She wanted him to continue going with me. I met his mother. He took me to her house in the Bronx, and she said she likes me very much and she wants to continue going, but she doesn't think, she needs his support, she needs his money, she needs his salary, and she doesn't think he should get married.
That's very good. You want to ask the question? Or else you can talk loud.
Okay. Before I met Mollie, I thought that being the oldest in the family and being the main support of the family, that my mother would, I didn't really think of getting married because I thought I would have to support my mother. But my mother kept remarking that she didn't want a bachelor for her son, and that I should get married. And of course that made a big difference.
It had to, again, thinking he had 200 years, the Pearlman, Goldstein, lineage. Is there anything you would want someone in the year 2200 to know about your history that you think is important?
No, you're going to talk, but you can shut this off meanwhile. Over here. No, you can shut the mic off.
Yeah, I shut it off over here, right? I also want to tell about the days when Dad was working in the post office, and I had Marty and I had Stan at the time, and Dad picked up on his accounting, and he picked up accounts so that he to earn extra money because things were becoming very expensive and the salary didn't go as far as it did at one time. This was after the war and prices went up very high. So he was working nights at the post office, and during the day he was trying to get clients, and he was working at the clients. Of course, he was working for very little. He would charge the clients $10 or $15 a month, which in those days was good. But that kept him busy. And it was a rather difficult life for us because we didn't have too much time to spend together. Of course, he was off from work 2 days a week. He was off from work 2 days a week, but then sometimes he spent those days working on his accounting. But we did manage to have a very happy life. I had no problem with either Stan or Marty. They grew up very nicely. We were always very proud of them. They did very well in school. In fact, when I would go to school, when they had open school days, the teacher used to say to me, "The wrong parents come to school." She says, "The parents of the children that I would want to come who are not doing well don't come," she says. But they always spoke very highly of Stan and always spoke very highly of Marty. Their scholastic activities were very good. And we were always proud of them. They never gave a moment's worry as far as doing anything wrong in any way at all.
I would argue a little bit of philosophy. Everything depends on where you are at one particular time, and it can make if you turn one corner instead of the other corner, it can make a big result in your life. Change life in your life. I was retired from the post office, was looking for new accounts, and I went to New York for some reason or other, and while I'm walking there, I meet my cousin Herbie Godbetter, blessed memory, and he was telling me about some an acquaintance of his was going to work for the IRS and was necessary for him to get rid of his accounts. And I contacted this man. I did take over his accounts, maybe 10 or 15 accounts, which gave me enough to nucleus for a bunch of accounts. But what I'm trying to say is, if I wasn't in New York, I wouldn't have met my cousin, I wouldn't have met this guy Solomon, and I would still be struggling maybe I've made some other connections, I don't know. But anyway, because I was in New York, because I met my cousin, I was able to have a nucleus for my accounting soon after I retired.
You want me to say?
Incidentally, I retired from the post office as soon as I could, which was at age 55.
Do you want me to say anything in later life? You don't want later life when we live tonight or anything like that, because that you'll know.
Or if you have anything else about early life, that you want to say.
I may think of it. Yeah,
Okay. That's very good.
We think about it.
Okay, to be continued, and this was an interview, a recorded interview with Nathan Pearlman and Mollie Pearlman, stars of the evening, and it is now July, I think this is July 23rd, 1990. July 23rd, 1990, and this is to be continued.